Good afternoon. Today I'm going to do a presentation on my passion in collecting hobbies. It's the history and talking about prototypes. Now for prototypes, I have my own definition. It's anything dealing with the history of making a Hot Wheel, but never intending to be put in a package. So if it was intended that car to be put in a package, it can't be a prototype. So hence, many of the modern cars you see today being sold on eBay, being stolen from the Malaysian factory where they took it off the factory line and it's a part, that's not a real prototype. That's just a partially built, newer car. So let's go through the presentation and talk about some unusual historical cars. First of all, this is sponsored by the East Coast Museum of Bruce Pascal. It's a museum I'm trying to make in Potomac, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C., where I'll showcase most of my prototype collection. Now, prototypes actually date back to the 1950s when it comes to Mattel. In 1950s, I think it was 1953, Mattel came out with their first plastic car, the Future car. And what you're seeing now is actually a wood mock-up. Wood mock-ups are traditionally one of the earliest stages of making a product that will be later released to the public. This way they could actually look at it, feel it, and see the size. And later on, they would actually make them in different scale and then size them down. But this particular one of the 1953 Mattel Future car is the exact same size as the car that was released to the public. Now let's talk about why they made the wood prototype. It was a lot easier for a model shop to hand carve, and it still took 200 to 300 hours, a 4 times mock-up of a Hot Wheel. And then later on, they used a machine called a pantograph to reduce the size. The pantograph was first invented by Thomas Jefferson, where he could simultaneously sign one letter and multiple other letters could be signed at the same time. Well, this is the same principle, where as you move, so does the other piece of metal, but on a pantograph machine, it does it in scale. So if you have, for example, a 4 times wood mock-up, as you move the machine, the pantograph, which can be seen in this photograph, over the wood mock-up, it reduces it on the plastic side to 1/4 of the scale, hence the 4-time mock-up. This particular piece was made for a car called the GT40, and I actually have this wood mock-up shown in my collection. And the man who's actually using the pantograph machine, his name is Jack Hargraves. He was one of the most prolific model makers at Mattel during the late 60s and early 1970s. Now, here's for a great piece of history. This is an actual photograph of the Hong Kong factory. Now, what's going on? Let's talk about it. These are grown men making models. Why are they making these models? Well, Mattel got so many orders to get into the Hot Wheels business. They didn't have the hundreds of hours or the manpower to hand carve these wood mock-ups. So what did they do? They bought model kits. Let's look at this next picture. Look at the bottom. So when you bought your Hot Wheel, it was really an AMT model kit, 1967 Mustang, miniaturized using the pantograph machine by the folks at Mattel. Now, lucky for Mattel, the statute of limitations is no longer over 50 years. So I don't think Mattel is going to get in trouble for using the AMT cars as the model base for the first cars they made. Now, do you need further proof? Not only do you have the photograph, this is the actual receipt that Harry Bradley used to go out and buy the Silhouette model kit car, which later on they made the model kit the Silhouette. Hence, there's never been a discovery of a wood model for a Mustang, a T-Bird, a Cougar, any of those cars, because they were made by using model kits. Now, here's an actual photograph. The man depicted in this picture, his name is Johnson Quarles. He was hired by Mattel as an apprentice model maker under a special program to help African-American minorities. Now, I tracked him down. Today, he's a retired airline pilot in Alaska. And he said, "Yes, Bruce, I loved working at Mattel." And I said, "What cars did you carve?" He said, "I carved 2 cars, the Maserati Mistral and the Rear-Load Beach Bomb." I said, "Amazing. Did you keep the cars?" "Yes, I kept one of them. I kept the Maserati." Unfortunately, I told him the Rear-Load Beach Bomb would be worth $25,000 and the Mistral is worth about $90,000. But he was excited to hear the legacy and the story that I told him about the Rear-Load Beach Bomb. But here's an exact example of somebody carving from hand the Maserati Mistral model. Now, I thought I'd also tell you, before a car is even made, somebody needs to draw it, and Mattel needs to decide what to do. Here's an example of Howard Reese designing what's called the grocery wagon. Now, years later, as a Mattel Hot Wheel collector, we know it's called the short order. And I'm glad Mattel chose the first car, although the second one looks pretty good with those double engines. Here's another picture. Howard was just an amazing artist. And notice the orange headlights on the peeping bomb here. And that was the same car, the same model, the orange headlights that came out originally in this car and that were stock for production. And very few of them are around, and they're worth a lot of money. But it's exactly the way Howard designed it. And last but not least, sometimes when we find these old models or blueprints or paintings, we actually find alternative names. On the bottom left, look at the two names, Chrome Dome or Noodlehead. Lucky for us, it became the Noodlehead, which is known today as the fastest racing Hot Wheel you can get. But here's the earliest drawing, and it was actually dated in 1969. Now let's start talking some rare models. Visiting a headquarters one day of a little small office a guy named Jack Hargraves had, I said, "What's that Camaro doing on the wall?" He goes, "That's the first one we used to help make the first car." So this was a mold taken from a model kit that eventually got slightly changed to make the beloved Camaro, the first car Hot Wheels ever made for production. Now, Harry Bradley, when he needed to make the first car called the Fleetside, which was an exact replica of the car he drove to work every day, guess what? There were no model kits, and they didn't have a model maker to make it fast enough. So what did he do? He went out and bought two model kits, a Chevy truck and a Chevy car. And he went to a professional model maker, and they mocked up this model. Actually has a top that goes off on the hood, and you can see the engine inside. And that was the model used to pantograph to make the Fleetside that you would buy as a Hot Wheel later. This is perhaps one of the rarest and most valuable mock-ups in the history of Hot Wheels. The Maverick, what a cool car. I was so excited to find this wood mock-up less than a year ago from a collector who sold it on eBay to somebody else, and then it tracked me down, and it's now in my collection. What a cool car. The wing was obviously added later, but this is what the wood mock-up looks like. Now the Mercedes. Most of these mock-ups, we call them wood mock-ups, but many of them are made from a silicon, metallic, very unusual material. But this four-time mock-up, the Mercedes, weighs more and it's smaller than any of the wood models I have. It's almost like a quasi-metal piece. And I believe this was used to pantograph much easier because you could smooth it and never have any of the bumps that wood may present. This is the one used for the police car, and I believe also for the fire department car. Here's the great Rolls-Royce. Again, this piece weighs probably close to 5 pounds, and it's the exact replica, and it's the piece used to make the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. Indy Eagle, what a cool car. Here's the actual resin/metallic four-time mock-up. I found a man who went to Mattel and offered 15 race cars that he had the rights to present. And Mattel only ended up doing 2 or 3 of them, the Shelby, the Chaparral, and maybe the Brabham. And luckily for me, I have all the original mock-ups in my collection, including the 10 that were never picked to be produced. Here's the short order, or as you saw earlier today, the grocery wagon. Great car, all solid wood. This one, I love it because it comes apart in many different pieces. Some of the wood models were just together. But when they started getting intricate with fins coming out and engines on the side, it was almost impossible for a wood person, a carver, to make it out of one piece. So therefore, they made it out of many pieces, and these actually have wheels. Very few of them have wheels, so this makes them a very rare wood mock-up. The bifocal. Can I say this is everyone's favorite? It's such a cool Dodge Challenger with an elongated double engine in the front. And you can see that if you've ever bought this car, it has a plastic engine that comes on the top. This piece of wood on the top shows you exactly how that plastic piece would sit in the car. Awesome piece. The large charge. This was an introduction of a mock-up that actually has some components that appear to be made out of plastic. And my theory is because the area around the windows got so thin, they were worried that the wood would break. So this is an alternative material. Now this is cool. This is called Chaps. Chaps was one of the riders for rumblers. Even the tiny rumbler rider needed to have a mock-up to be reduced later to make the miniature rider. Here is a rubberized version that they cast from the mold of the actual full-size 4-time mock-up. Everybody's favorite, the Ferrari 308. Great piece. What's unique about this piece is you can see it has several pieces of wood put together to carve to make this very beautiful Ferrari car. The Porsche 930. This car, here's an example of the wood next to the heavy resin. This resin metallic piece weighs close to 20 pounds. It's probably one of the heaviest pieces I have. It's a little bit of a mystery why they made that and the wood, and they made different versions, but mostly these things would never deteriorate. The wood could drop and dent. These would drop and probably hurt the person they fell on. Now let's start talking about the transition to early prototypes. The one on the bottom is an example of what Mattel did when Mr. Handler said, let's get in the toy car business. How did they make the car faster? So they went down and they bought Mustangs and race cars from Matchbox. Then they took the insides out and experimented with faster wheels. And then they had to screw it back together because they couldn't rivet at that time. The technology wasn't at the factory to actually put it together. So here's a screwed on race car that's super fast with the beginning of what's called red lines. Now you'll notice you can barely tell, there's no red lines yet. These are just prototype wheels put on, and then this car would be tested. So it's an early mock-up, one of the earliest prototype Hot Wheels you can find. And above it is a Resin Shelby. If I turn this car over, it would look like a normal Shelby to you. And only if you turned it over would you find out it's made out of resin. Speaking of resin, here's a bunch of other cars. Here's another reason resin cars were made. They were used for catalogs. So if you find an early catalog that shows the picture of the Torero, it's that car in the center. And we all know the actual production actually looked different than that car, but that's the exact car. What's amazing is so many Hot Wheel discoveries have been made where we actually can see a catalog and then one day find the car that was actually used to be inside that catalog. I don't know about you, but I get a thrill when I put these Indiana Jones mysteries and I put them together. And by the way, let's talk about a different type of prototype, the hand-painted prototype. When I first showed you this slide, you probably thought that was just a nice, beautiful Mustang stocker. But look at the windows. They're painted gray. The entire piece has been hand-painted. I actually interviewed the women at Mattel. There's 2 of them that hand-painted these with miniature paintbrushes. They told me it would take 80 hours. That's 2 full weeks to make one complete Hot Wheel. But the attention to detail and the perfection, these women could have been artists in a local gallery. Now, in my definition of prototypes, I include any car up until the ones that were designated to be put into packages. Well, on the final day before production, before they tell the plant, let's make 5 million of these cars, they make an FEP. An FEP stands for Final Engineering Product. So this is an example of a Mark IV that they probably made 144 of them, racks of 12, painted all of them. And then these were the ones that went around the final view of the factory and they said, yes, this car is ready to be released to the public. So here's an example of an FEP. It was never meant to be put into a package. And usually these cars are beautifully struck, freshly painted, and the best dyes. So hence, almost like proof coins. Now, let's talk rarity. Did you know for almost every early car, they made a brass example? Now, why did they make the brass example? They needed to test these cars on the future accessories that Mattel is going to be used. You really can't send a 4-time wood mock-up times a gigantic orange track. You couldn't send a resin car because it doesn't have the same weight and feel. So they would actually use brass, which had the same weight qualities as Amc metal, which was used for production. So these 2 cars were handmade, many, many, many hours, unbelievable detail. The one on the left, the Olds 442, one of the hot cars in the hobby. The one on the right, you were about to say Mighty Maverick, actually Mad Maverick, because that was the original name of the car. early Camaros they experimented with. The first batch, they actually painted the cars over Amc. They weren't even plated, so they weren't that shiny. And I think the people at Mattel said, you know what, I don't love this look. So they ended up making them shinier, more translucent. Now this car is an early prototype. How do you tell it's an early prototype? Very simply, turn the car sideways and notice a gap between the back seat and the hole for the back tire. And those ways, they had never really put together at that time the complete interior. So that's how you can tell it's an early prototype. Another way to tell it's an early prototype, notice how it doesn't say patent pending. All cars need to have the copyright material. The early prototypes don't have it. These cars are very rare and hard to find. Now let's talk about some cool cars. Have you ever thought maybe Mattel one day made a car and decided at the last minute, nah, let's not release it to the public? Well, that's what this car is. This car on the plans is called Dream Wagon, and they actually made the hand-painted resin. Now, if you look closely in this car, you can see in the brass version of the same car. So they made the plans, the resin, and the brass car. If you cut the car in half, kind of looks like a breakaway bucket on the front side. And the back side, who knows what that is. I don't think anybody liked it. And maybe that's why they never released it to the public. Maybe they thought it was never really appealing. Now this car, I am so upset they never made. It's the Mercury Cyclone. Look at that front bumper. But my theory of why this car was never released, even though they made the resins and they had the plans, was I think it looked too much like the Olds 442, which they just released. And I can just imagine in a room Mr. Handler saying, why are we making that car and why are we making this car? They look too much alike. Let's just do one of them. Wouldn't it be awesome if Mattel released this car one day? I think it would be awesome. Now, special cars. Have you ever been to McDonald's and you look on the wall and you see the picture of the hamburger? And doesn't it look delicious? The bun is perfect, the sauce is great, the hamburger looks sizzling. And then you order yours and they go, order number 72, and then you unwrap a piece of paper and it kind of doesn't look like what that picture on the wall looked like. Well, product, placement, and production quality is critical to not only McDonald's, but to Mattel. So what did they do? What is their version of that perfect hamburger? They asked the factory in Hong Kong to plate these cars and go through a process, and their goal was to make the cars look like Christmas ornaments. I'm pretty confident to say less than 20 of these are known, and in this picture is 5 of them. Look at the shine. They look like Christmas ornaments, and the bottom of the car is completely chromed and shiny also. These were the cars used for the television commercials and many of the advertisements. And if you look hard on some of the catalogs, you'll see how they shine. Smart people at Mattel, even smarter that they allowed the executives to take these home, who, lucky for us, eventually sold them to the public. Here's another special car. Painted beautifully red, open hood scoop, dark interior. I think there's less than 2 of these cars known. This also was used for catalogs. Now this looks like a ordinary Python to you. Not even in that great shape. But one secret is every time you see a Python, pick it up and turn it over. And maybe you'll get lucky and you'll see the word cheetah on the bottom. You see, Mattel originally planned to produce the cheetah, and they actually made a few of them. And then a car company called Cheetah said, you can't make a car. Doesn't look like our car. So Mattel said, oh, what are we going to do? They quickly changed the name to Python. So when you go to car shows and your car collectors, 99.999% of the world, they have Pythons. But maybe you can be lucky and find the rare and elusive cheetah. Now this is a mighty Maverick, but it's pretty cool. It was never assembled. It was used by an engineer to test how the cars could be put together to fit in the form. But this car is special. It's also unassembled, and it has a translucent interior. We're talking pretty sick rare. But what's even better about this car is look at the bottom. Mad Maverick. Those are the 2 cars that Mattel made, and after they made them, they realized, oh no, we can't do it, because a competitor, Johnny Lightning, darn those Johnny Lightnings, they claimed their cars were faster. They already came out with the Mad Maverick. So Mattel quickly switched it to the mighty Maverick. Now, also, sometimes in the world of prototypes, we've talked about resins and all these different features. Sometimes they had colors that were never released to the public. This car came from Bob Rosas. It's the only known silver Charger in the world. Here's a mighty Maverick with a translucent interior. Now, why would it be made this way? It's a simple answer. Probably the first day the Mavericks were being made, the mighty Mavericks, they didn't have any white or black plastic interior material in the machine that made the interiors. So they just grabbed the translucent, and hence you got a beautiful, rare car, actual prototype. Now, here's something else special. Did you know the Indy cars, when they were made, they had a big problem? They couldn't be used for Mattel's accessories. They were too tiny, they were too light, and they wouldn't touch the supercharger. So if you put an Indy car through the supercharger, it would get clogged, and Mattel had a problem. So they sat down, and for each of these 4 cars, they made unique gas tanks. Then they started drilling holes in the bottom, and you could put the plastic tank onto the car, and hence it could be used. But for whatever reason, Mattel decided to never release these to the public. I think they just gave up on the process of using these. So hence, exceedingly rare to find one, much less each unique gas tank for each unique of these cars. Now, certain cars, they actually produced, and then I think when Mattel started looking at them, they said, you know what, quality control, this won't work. The first twin mills made, they had no rear fender. Anybody could have just touched those wheels and moved them up and down. And I think Mattel decided, you know what, maybe it's better if we cover those wheels. So hence, all the ones you buy normally, and you see even till today, when they're reproduced, they have full fenders. But this is the rare early version called cut fender twin mill. Now, this is a super rare one. We don't know the whole story, but Mattel's R&D department was given a bucket of cars, and they said, come up with new ideas. So here's an experiment for I guess I'll call it a unicycle rear. But again, you can see it's a cut fender twin mill, and they took that prototype and said, maybe we can come up with a car with just 3 wheels. Bet you somebody from Mattel said, hey, quality control or cost control, we can save 1 wheel, which saves us a penny. But the car was never released. Now, sometimes you get alternative paints. They only released the Fire Chief in beautiful translucent paint. Yet, there's at least 15 of these known to be done in enamel. Here's 3 of them in my collection. Sometimes collectors go crazy when there's a car that very few are known in a certain color interior. These red ones are the highly desirable white interior 312Ps. That makes them worth $2,000 each. But look what we've got in the center. The only known aqua with white interior. It's a mystery why it's made, but coveted by collectors because it's a one-of-one prototype. Now, of course, when people know about white interiors, the red bearing white interior, many people didn't know they made 2 variations of the different color white, the one on the left and on the right. And on the one on the left has a blank base, doesn't even have the words red baron on the bottom, meaning it was an earlier in the production process. Sometimes they made cars in black. These are considered early internal Mattel testing cars. Black is the universal color that shows mistakes. So if you ever see a black car, it's the hardest car in the world to make it look beautiful all the time. Thumbprints, dents, you can see it. And that's why they painted them in black, so they could actually examine the car to see if there's anything else they needed to do in the process of making the cars. And there's probably 15 different cars in the world known that are painted black. Now, by the way, I'm talking Mattel, not the kids who took them home and painted their cars with tester paint black. Now, these are called the dinner cars. Dinner cars are super cool. In 1969, Mattel had an internal dinner, and everybody who showed up had a special all-chromed Indy car on their table. And here's examples of a few of them, the Shelby and the Brabham. They're stunningly beautiful pieces of jewelry. I really wish Mattel would make these cars again. White Camaro, probably one of the most well-known prototype Camaros. Nobody really knows why these were made. And the reason is they weren't made early cars. People who studied the history of Camaros, these aren't the Camaros that were made in '68. These were made a year or 2 later. They're a later version. And why they made them in white, nobody knows. My only theory is somebody said probably make me 100 white Camaros and we'll do some testing with them to try different, stripes or colors, but who knows? But the white Camaro, very coveted. Next car is what we call lunchtime cars. Lunchtime cars or lunchbox cars are cars that we think engineers who had all the tools in front of them to do whatever they want to Hot Wheels decided to make some fun Hot Wheels for themselves. So what do you think of the Woody pickup? I think it's a car they should have made. It's pretty cool. Now they also made the Paddy Wagon in Spectra Flame colors. They made him in orange and light blue. Again, a different color that was released. One other difference. Notice there's no gold on the top. Normally the roof of the car has the gold and a number on it. Nothing there. Reason why? Prototype. Can't do a talk about prototypes without the king of the prototypes. The rear load pink beach bomb. Now why do I say it's the king? I'm going to tell you why. It's not just a rear load beach bomb, which is a prototype, but this particular one has a base of a side loader. So it's a transition between the rear loaders and the side loaders all in one, and it's that beautiful pink rear loader top. Hence, it's the only one like it in the world. There are other rear loaders, there are other side loaders, and there's maybe a few of these cars that have rear loader tops, I think 3 of them, and side loader bases, but only one in pink, and here it is. Now this is a regular rear loader. It's Rose, recently just purchased. It also has the regular rear loader base. Real cute car. And what's exciting is it was just discovered in the year 2017, and it just shows you more of these are out there. Keep looking, you can find your own prototypes. Now, I love these cars. These are the side loaders, right? Look really hard. You notice something different? Side loaders were made in Hong Kong. That means the glass is supposed to be blue. In this case, the glass is clear. When cars were internally being tested, and since they were being tested in the United States, the glass in the United States was clear. Hence, these cars have clear glass. Maserati Mistral. Both of these are also prototypes. But what makes them prototypes is the most unique, smallest detail. The glass is a charcoaly looking clear glass. Almost like a little bit of black sand was put in there. Very difficult to tell, and a few of them exist too. Here's a Rolls-Royce made in Hong Kong, yet the glass is clear. That makes it a prototype. Here's some more prototypes. These all have the slightly darker glass, and they never made an anti-freeze Mercedes-Benz before, except you can find one right here. And notice the glass, definitely a little bit darker. The green Torero, they never made it in enamel. I guess they did as a prototype. Lots of Indy Eagle type cars and Brabhams and fun cars. Now what are these from? Some of these were found on eBay. We believe they were kid-tested cars, the orange one and the black one. And how do you tell it's a prototype? Well, not only does it have a white interior, it has clear glass. And one little side story, do you see that number 48 in the upper left? If you look really hard, there's no red line on that front tire. And I bought that from an art director of Mattel. And one day I was looking at the catalog that the art director produced. I go, oh my God, the 48 sticker looks exact. The car looks exact. And then I noticed on the catalog, the car had no red line on its tire too. That was the actual car used on the catalog. I'm telling you, I get such an excitement when I match up something that's in a piece of paper of Mattel that was produced, millions of them, and then we find the actual car. T42, do you notice anything different here? I'll give you 3 seconds. Okay, now for the answer. Where's the question mark? So here's an example of a car that was made, and I bet you Larry Wood and Elliot Handler were staring at it and saying, what are we missing? Which way does the car go? You know what, Larry, that sounds like a question. Let's put a question mark on the door. So the car was changed, the question mark was on the door, hence, that is a definition of a prototype. Here's some more prototypes. All white, unassembled, the beginning stage, the full fenders and body parts. Here's an example of you can have one car but have many types of prototypes known. Okay, you know this is a prototype. They never made Jack and the Rabbit. Jack in the Box, in the Jackrabbit as I call it, in red. But here you got one. So somebody got lucky and they found it, and lucky it found its way into my collection. This is a very unusual piece, probably the most unusual one I have. I bought it from the Larry Wood collection, and he probably had it made as an exact smaller model of the Carabo. And then they obviously increased the size to make it the size of a typical Hot Wheel. But it's pretty unique. There's nothing else like I have it in my collection. Spoilers. Here's an example. On the right side of the gold, they never made spoilers in gold color. So you got the Boss Hoss, Light My Firebird, look what you got here, and the heavy Chevy. And what's really special about the heavy Chevy, it has a prototype sticker. That piece of paper with the black stripe, that's what Mattel probably wanted to do stripes in the beginning. Then people got to them and said, let's make them thinner. And hence, thinner ones came out later. So not only is that a prototype heavy Chevy in gold, never made, and I think there's only one or two of those known, it's the only one with the prototype sticker on top of it. Everybody's favorite, the Olds 442. One difference makes a big difference. The interior is dark. The dark interior 442s were the first ones made. And these days, it's the hottest casting out there, and lucky for me, I have 3 of them. Now this car looks interesting, doesn't it? Looks like somebody scratched some fins on the side. Why? Because the first one they were scratching had no fins. And then after that, they said, look at this, the interior is clear. This was the first one that came out this way. And then later on, the whipped creamer, they decided to make the car with fins. So here's an example of a car actually being produced by Mattel. They thought they were done, and then they sent it back to the factory and said, let's retool the car and make it look cooler. It just shows you the effort Mattel was putting in to make these cars to make them sell the best. Many other people wouldn't do that kind of effort. Looks like a normal purple Manus to you, but let's turn it over. Where's the base? Where does it say purple Manus? Where's the copyright? Sometimes they had the top done and the bottom done, but the bottom wasn't done completely because the copyright legal department hadn't sent them the exact words and ways they wanted it to be made. So a few of these cars were made in the interim with blank bases. There's probably about 30 or 40 of them known in the world, but they're pretty cool. It's a Hot Wheel. Here's another unusual car. It's totally beat up. It was bought by eBay. We're pretty sure this was a kid-tested car, but again, that car was never produced in those colors for the general public. Here's another one. They never really made them with the white and black like that. Again, from that same eBay score from years ago. The ladder. The first ladders made on day one were white. Now, when you see them at the stores, from 1968 on, they were black. So the white ones are very valuable. I will note, though, be very careful. People today are reproducing the white ladders, so it's very difficult to tell whether you have an original or a reproduction. This is the cord. They never made the cord with the orange top. So this makes this extremely rare, an unpainted cord with the very few orange tops. These are super cool. Engineers like to look and see how a car worked. So these were sizzlers. And this way the engineer could actually look inside and see the battery and understand how the car ran. I think there's less than 10 of these known. They're awesome. Steering wheel cars. Can you believe it? Mattel actually experimented to see whether cars could be made with the ability to steer. So here's the steering van, and here's the bottom. Look at the intricate detail. I think this picture itself explains why the car was never made. It would have taken way too long to do the technology to make these cars actually work and be able to sell them for under $1. Here's some cars. Bob Rosa sold them to me. He said they were rejected colors. The actual colors, if you put them next to them, are slightly different versions of every car you see here. So even the paint was argued and fought over Mattel which colors would sell the most. Now this isn't a prototype, but I always thought it was a cool car. If you went to the Toy Fair in 1975, this was the car they gave to every toy company vendor that showed up. Very hard to find today. Now these are special. In 1976, they went around the radio stations and they passed out as part of a gimmick these gold Porsches. Now that's the one on the top. The executive said, make us a few in 24 karat gold. And look at the bottom. Look how shiny, they're light. Very, very cool, extremely rare cars. I think less than 6 are known. Here's the power pad. I once found an old file from a factory that had a slide from 1969 that showed this car. I was so excited to find it years later, and you can see it's a prototype. To see the base, the car was actually screwed together. Pretty amazing. Here's a car, alternative tempo. They never made this car in green and orange. They made it with blue and different colors. Here you go. Never seen before. Here's another one never seen before, a chrome Sir Rodney Roadster. This car came out in yellow and green. You know what? I wish they had made it in chrome. I think it looks much better. What do you think? Grid cars. Now, grid cars were made because if you had just stuck on the side of a car, Mustang Stalker, because the car has curves, hills and valleys and dimples, you wouldn't be able to read the Mustang Stalker too well. So a grid allows the car to be distorted, the sticker or tampo to be distorted in such a way that it looks like it's on a flat surface. So these cars first had to be applied a grid, and then they would actually make the tampo. So these cars were only used for internal Mattel testing. The only way you could ever get these is if you knew a Mattel employee or a Mattel employee retired. Now this is interesting. In 1976, I think, 1975, they had a winter ball. Maybe it was 1972. I'll tell you in about 2 seconds. So this car came out, but this is the sign-in board that all the employees got to sign before they went to the actual event. Here's the actual car, 1975. So that was the car for the Christmas party Mattel's employees got, and it was called the Winter Ball card. They never made this car in blue. I kind of wish they did, but finding a car in a color never produced, to me, is the definition of a cool prototype. Here's something. Here's 3 cars that all had tampos, but they never installed the tampos. And I got to be honest with you. I think the cars look pretty cool. I think they're possibly even better without the tampo than with the tampo. Again, I call them prototypes because they are never made to be released to the public, used for internal testing. Now, does this car look good to you? I took a really good close-up picture. Why? It's hand painted. Look at the waviness. This is a car that took a woman 80 hours to hand paint. And they probably used this for a catalog to shoot because the car wasn't produced yet. And if you look at the bottom, it doesn't have anything written on the bottom, and it's held together by screws. So let's call this a triple proto. Screws, blank base, and hand painted. One more, it would have been a home run. This one's pretty cool. It's a Blackwall car, but it was probably put together with all they had in the factory at the time, and all they had left was red lines. Pretty cool. I love those oddities. Here's what the base looks like. It's also a screwed base. This one has really unusual wheels. I actually have a bag of prototype wheels. None of them are like this. It's the only time I've ever seen red wheels on a Hot Wheel. What do you think? I think they could have sold pretty well. Looks pretty interesting. This is another car. If you look at the bottom, it's another way to make an experimental way to make the car have a steering mechanism. Pretty cool. Here's one. This is the crash car. The crash car was an experimental where they put a Lincoln Continental. Why'd they pick the Lincoln? It was the biggest car. It was the easiest to put parts in. So once this hits the wall, boom, the spring works and the car flies out. You see the little spring on the bottom? Pop, that thing comes out. Here's another car, white interior, beautiful car. Unfortunately, the ones for production were black. I think white would have sold better. Here's the music car. Any of you guys ever put baseball cards in your wheels and you rode your bicycle back in the late 60s, early 70s? I did. Well, it's the same principle. They had a little plastic chamber and a little needle, and as the car rolled down, it would make different musical tunes. Why did this car get vetoed? I asked the R&D guy. Because it slowed the car down too much, and it would have cost too much money. Hence, this is the prototype, never put in production. Here's pretty cool. The actual date, July 21st, 1976, first shot. What is a first shot? The first time the chassis put together, and in this case, they only had the top, the body. The bottom wasn't even done. How can you tell? The bottom was just a piece of plastic. But they wanted to make sure that the mold created an accurate size car. So here you go, it's approved. Here's another one, June of 1976. This is the Datsun. It put together, it fit perfectly, so it's been approved. By the way, I have a great lesson for you. When I get this car, it was beautiful all metal. I stupidly put my finger on the front, and look at the surprise I got 10 years later. A nice little Bruce Pascal fingerprint. Here's the base of that car. Once again, notice how it fits perfectly, but doesn't even have the lettering on the base because this car was built so fast. Just to see if it fits together, the next step is to put the wording on the base. Amc Pacer. Interesting question. It's a Blackwall car. Why does it have red line wheels? because the car was designed in 1976. It just wasn't released till a couple years later. So when the prototype was made, they were still in the red line era. Love that. Here's another flip-out car. Look at the mechanism here. They had a spring, and when the wheel hits something, boom, the car flips over. Here's what it looks like. They took a mighty Maverick, cut it out, and that's how they came up with the engineering pilot. And guess what? I've now shown you 110 different prototypes. I hope you enjoyed this little get-together, and we talked about all the different types of prototypes out there. And remember, if you ever find any, make sure you call Bruce Pascal. Thank you and have a great day.